Hi there, Chris Hanna here, and welcome to today's webinar on virtual interviewing. For the next 30 minutes, I'm going to be taking you through the must-have information that you need to know to ace your next virtual interview. For those who don't know, I have been leading and managing teams that support the customer experience for most of my career. For almost the last decade, I built and led a team that provided global technical support. As part of leading a team that works globally, I've had to hire a lot of people remotely. I've completed a ton of different virtual interviews, hiring and promoting people to various levels of the role in my team. Now, sitting on the other side of the screen, I have seen people completely derail their chances of getting an interview because they were not prepared. They didn't know what to anticipate as part of a virtual interview. So I decided to package up all of my experience and ideas into this virtual webinar to help people overcome these barriers to getting their dream job. In addition, I'm also the host of my own podcast, The Chris Hanna Show. It's a weekly program where I share tips and tricks to help people achieve more, focusing on their impact, their productivity, and their performance. So some of the content that you're going to hear today, if you're a regular listener of my show or you're just new to my podcast, you're going to hear some things that are duplicated because there's a lot of content that I talk about there that's also covered in this webinar today. Because I think it's important that we find the career where we can be most successful. And a virtual interview is going to be a key part of that. Today we're going to be talking about the following: the basics. Essentially, what is a virtual interview? The technology that's required or needed. How to test your setup effectively. That's a pitfall that a lot of people struggle with. I'm going to be also giving some virtual interview tips and tricks. We're going to talk about the importance of asking questions and the value of following up. And at the end, I'll give you my contact information in case you want to follow up or you're interested in additional help or support. So with more increased remote work, virtual interviews, they're here to stay. As we continue to move more forward, I predict that we're going to see virtual interviews be the main way that recruiting actually happens in many businesses. That's the main way that recruiters are going to assess the talents, the strengths, the interests, and the experience of candidates. So the more comfortable one is with virtual interviews, the better their chances are of getting the job that they want. The last thing you want to do is blow your chance at getting a role that you're passionate about because you didn't take the time to prep and plan and prepare the right way. What is a virtual interview? Well, a virtual interview is one where a candidate and a recruiter will meet over video instead of meeting in person. Now, there are some common collaboration tools that are used by many companies for their interviewing purposes. I've listed a few of them here, and sometimes these will change depending on the company and what their preferences are. But they all do the same thing. Essentially, they allow people to connect over video. Where many people struggle or get worried when they're told that they're going to have a virtual interview is the fear around technology. And let me tell you, it doesn't need to be overly complicated. Technology, if you plan the right way, doesn't need to be the thing that derails you from being successful. There are a couple different ways that you can look at technology. And I kind of put them into two buckets. One, there's a basic setup, and then there's more advanced setup. So the basic one, it's really simple. You're going to need a laptop or a computer with a webcam. Now, most webcams are integrated in to a laptop already, so there you're covered. The second thing you're going to need is a headset. Now, sure, you can have a virtual interview without having a headset, but there's a good chance that background noise is going to be picked up, or you might have a hard time hearing someone, or the recruiter might have a hard time hearing you. So a headset helps to minimize that. But some people want a more complex setup or a more advanced setup. And there's nothing wrong with that as well, because it's going to produce a better audio experience and a better video experience. So a couple things that might help with creating a more advanced setup in terms of your technology would be a separate USB webcam. That gives you the flexibility to move it around, to adjust it in a way that makes it more flattering for your eyes and maybe for the environment that you have in your background as well. Because sometimes the laptop webcam isn't as flexible in terms of being able to position it in a way that makes it work for you. You might also want to have a different USB microphone. There are many different options that are available out there in the market for a separate USB mic, but it's going to make sure that you have the best quality compared to just a regular headset or a cheap pair of headphones that maybe has a built-in mic, but maybe not as good a quality. Because when you speak during a virtual interview, it's important that the person hears you. The other thing I think that can be really helpful is having a secondary monitor. So you could have your laptop, but if you could have it plugged into another monitor or maybe even a television, that can make a world of difference because maybe that gives you the ability to have other materials available. Not to script and read from, but to actually just have as a reference point. It could be like your resume or the job posting itself, because you want to make sure you keep the recruiter on that main primary screen. Now, with the right equipment in place, the most important part, and where many people fail with their interview, is testing their setup in advance. You don't want to let the technology fail you. Now, the recruiter is going to provide you with all the details you need to know about what platform is being used, when and where of the interview itself. With that information, there's an opportunity to test in advance. Get more familiar with the platform. Potentially, if you've never used that platform before, maybe you should log in, because a lot of them offer free trial versions, and learn how to turn on your microphone or to turn on your camera. Do the things that you need to do during the virtual interview, but know how to do them in advance. And that can make a world of difference, making sure that you seem more prepared and ready to go. And ultimately, more confident. Now, there's some fundamental best practices that I think you should keep in mind when it comes to testing your setup. Number one is make sure that you've actually downloaded the latest software version of the platform. I've seen people not be on the latest version, and there might be bugs or issues that cause the technology to fail them or not deliver an optimal experience. Or there's certain features that are in the newest release that an employer wants to use, and by you not being on the latest version of the software, it slows down or delays the process, or maybe makes the interview less effective overall. It's also important to make sure that you configure your settings beforehand. What is the microphone and the camera that you want to use? You got to configure those audio and video settings to make sure that you are using the right ones, so you're not wasting time at the beginning of the interview or potentially being flustered trying to set that stuff up. And once you have all of those in place, the third thing you need to do is practice. Practice using the software, practice getting familiarized with the layout and what you need to do and how you need to navigate and move around, because it can make a world of difference. And it also gives you the ability to make any adjustments so that you're not in the interview adjusting your camera up and down or moving things around. Make sure you're set up to go right from the get-go. Some other friendly reminders that I think are important when it comes to technology and ensuring that it doesn't fail you and let you down are the following. Number one, don't lose power. If you're on a laptop, either make sure you're fully charged or, better yet, be plugged in. There's nothing worse than having your power drop in the middle of an interview. I have interviewed candidates before where this has happened, and what it does is it shows me as the hiring manager that this person is not prepared. They're not organized. They haven't prepped the right way. The second thing you can do is decide, especially when it comes to dropping, is figure out, are you going to be on wired or a wireless connection? Because depending on your location, being on wireless might be problematic. A video call does use up a lot of bandwidth, and there is a potential risk that your call might drop, or it might be choppy and maybe not the best quality, or may not be able to hear someone. So wherever possible, try to be on a wired connection versus wireless. That's important and that's critical. And also, don't be shy and turn on your camera. You're having a virtual interview. If you were going to be in person, you would see one another. Why would you not turn on your camera when you're going to have a virtual interview and discussion for an opportunity? There's so many people that I have interviewed over the years who've said that they're not going to turn on their camera because they don't feel comfortable. But when they do that, all I'm hearing is just a voice back and forth. And I'll have my camera on and it's more one-sided. There's an opportunity there. Just make sure, just turn on your camera, face the person, and let's just have a regular conversation about your skills, your talents, and ultimately why you are the best fit for this job. Another reminder when it comes to technology is make sure you join the interview on time. In fact, actually, you should join a couple minutes early. Because if you join a couple minutes early, you can tell if there's an issue maybe with the platform itself, or have you configured all your settings in advance so that you can just have a smooth interview where all you need to do is focus on selling yourself and why you're the best person for the role versus trying to figure out and scramble with the technology. So make sure you are joining in advance. Now, with technology out of the way, you need to focus on the interview itself. And it's not that complicated. I often tell people when I'm coaching them on interview best practices or doing a mock interview session that it's essentially just a conversation. And it's a conversation about why they should hire you above anyone else. Your goal with an interview, whether it's virtual or in person, is the same. And it's to describe what makes you stand out from the competition and why, if they can only hire one person, they hire you. Now, during this webinar, I'm not going to be sharing interview questions because I think whether it's virtual or it's in person, the interviews are the same, and a lot of the questions are the same. But I have included a link for my latest ebook, Your Definitive Guide to Prepping for an Interview, that is available on Amazon and chrishanna.ca if you are interested in learning more about interview questions and the best way to answer them. Now, without talking about specific questions, there are some must-haves that you do need to know when it comes to an interview, whether it's virtual or it's in person, that I do want to share. The first is that you need to research the company. Now, you should have a basic understanding of what the company does. That should be part of your process of even applying for the role in the first place. But when it comes to the interview, you need to make sure that you know enough about the company when they ask you about that company. A lot of companies will do this. They will ask you, what do you know about us, who we are, what we do? But then you want to find a way to tie that back to what is your strengths and your skill set, and how does that help benefit the company? Which leads to the next part, is really about understanding the role. From a posting, sure, you can get a good understanding of what's going on, and maybe you talk to some people who work for the organization, but you need to be able to clearly articulate why you and why this role. If you can do that successfully, that can make a world of difference, because you have to make sure that you sell yourself in a way that the recruiter's requirements for hiring for this role are fulfilled, and they're fulfilled by you. Now, when it comes to your interview, you do want to prep the right way, and by that I mean, what are some questions that you think are going to be asked? And what are some examples that you can pull together to actually make sure you can sell a coherent story of why they should choose you? You don't want to have scripted answers, because that doesn't really do anything of value. All that shows is you can memorize what needs to be said, not necessarily genuinely what needs to be heard. I've been interviewing people for almost 15 years, and one of the things that frustrates me the most is when I ask a candidate, do you have any questions for me about the role, the company, or what we do? They say no. There's an opportunity there to ask questions, and I'll dive deeper into that in a couple of slides as well. But you need to make sure you're asking questions to convey that you're interested in the role itself. You want to make sure that you are asking in questions, but you're coming armed with neither knowing this is actually the right role for you or not. Because maybe it isn't. Maybe if you ask certain questions and you hear the answers from the recruiter or the hiring manager, they tell you that this is not the position where you're going to be successful, or you know that you're going to get into a role that you instantly want to leave or get out of, then maybe it's time to look elsewhere. Now, even though that it is a virtual interview, you still want to dress for an in-person interview. You probably heard the term dress for success. Well, that is great advice, because you need to demonstrate a certain level of professionalism that's appropriate for the role that you're going after. And whatever is going to be shown on camera, maybe from the waist up, needs to reflect the right image that you ultimately want to convey. But I do believe it's important to make sure that you project an image that is your authentic self. Who you are and what you look like is important too. Don't try to pretend to be somebody else and be inauthentic. Doing so doesn't really help you or serve you, because when you get that job, they're going to say, this is not the same person that I hired. So find a way to be professional, but be your authentic self as well, and finding the right mix of clothes that really best represents you and who you are. Now, as part of getting yourself ready, you do need a few final things to make sure that you're ready to go before jumping into that virtual interview. One, location matters. So choose a quiet space with decent lighting. I've had far too many virtual interviews over the years where it's dark, or worse yet, the candidate is sitting in the sun and all I see is a silhouette or a shadow. It's like talking to somebody in the witness protection program. That's not effective. So you got to make sure you have the right location. As part of that location, it's also making sure that you eliminate distractions. Is there an opportunity to make sure that your pets or your kids or your loved ones are not in the background playing or doing something, or maybe taking away or making a lot of noise? That's important. And when it comes to distractions, it's also important to make sure you shut off things like your cell phone. Last thing you want is your cell phone continuing to go off, or having programs that are open up on your laptop continue to distract you or pull away your attention. Minimize the distractions and you'll be better for it. And lastly, position your webcam the right way. Now again, if you have the more advanced setup, like I talked about earlier, you have a lot more flexibility. And if you don't, and you're just using it from your laptop itself, that's okay too. But try and position your screen in a way that your webcam actually really focuses in on your eyes more than anything else. The last thing that as a recruiter we want to see is your forehead or just the neck, or even I've seen, this is one that really frustrates me, is when the webcam is positioned so we just see the side of your face. You're looking towards the monitor and talking to the person, but the webcam is just seeing the side of you. Position your webcam the right way so you can maintain eye contact. That's very important. So now it's showtime. The virtual interview has started, the camera's on, but now comes the most important thing that you need to do. You got to introduce yourself and make a first impression, a positive first impression. Because the truth is that we don't get a second chance to make a first impression. Now, when it's in person, you can shake someone's hand, you can look them in the eye, greet them positively, but you don't have the ability to have that handshake. So now you have to have what we like to call a virtual handshake. And that's where you are conveying confidence and you're making a strong introduction. And you have to make sure that your mannerisms, your body language, and your voice shows enthusiasm as well. And that you were excited to be in this interview with them. And for them to take the time with you and that you appreciate that as well. So your introduction is important. Now, answering questions on virtual interviews, that isn't that complicated, to be honest. But I have seen some people completely derail themselves. And I do want to share some examples of things that I think you need to avoid. The first is that you got to resist the urge to follow a script. Sure, you can have a secondary monitor with your answers to certain questions available. But if you read a script, it doesn't come across as genuine. It certainly doesn't come across as authentic. And we don't get to know the real you, and that is important. You also need to make sure that you control your pace. For some reason, people tend to speak very quickly when they're talking online. And with technology being a huge factor in the success of a virtual interview, speaking so quickly doesn't do anyone any favors. It might make it actually harder to hear what you're trying to say. So make sure that you speak in a way that is slow enough, but not too slow, but certainly not so fast. Just go the Goldilocks style, where it's just right. That you speak in a way that people can actually hear and understand you. You also don't want to ramble. I've lost interest quite easily in some interviews where you ask a question to someone, they answer, and because you're taking notes, they feel like they need to continue to fill the dead air or the space, so they continue to talk. And what they do is they talk themselves out of the interview or of answering that question successfully. It is important to make sure that you don't ramble. Eye contact is key. Maintain good eye contact. And again, that goes back to positioning your camera the right way. But don't find yourself looking off to the side and talking to someone the whole time. Maintain eye contact because that shows a certain level of professionalism and confidence as well that we're looking for. We're looking to form that connection virtually with someone, and eye contact is important. And ultimately, you want to minimize moving. If you're moving around and your hands are going flailing all over the place, it can be really distracting. It also has an opportunity to derail your interview from an audio perspective, because sometimes you move around and it jostles, whether it's a headset or whether it's an external microphone, or maybe it moves your webcam and your webcam starts to flutter. So find an opportunity to get a position that you feel comfortable in and try and minimize the movements that you have. And also be mindful of any facial expressions that you may or may not make, intentionally or unintentionally as well. Now, I said earlier that asking questions is important. It is so vital that we ask questions in interviews, because interviews are a two-way street. Sure, the recruiter, the hiring manager is asking you questions to know whether you're the right fit for a company or for a role. But you as a candidate have an opportunity to ask them questions too, to figure out whether this is the right position for you or not. So don't hold back on not asking for something that you want to know an answer to. It's important that we do so. So here are 5 questions that you might want to ask a recruiter or hiring manager. Number 1 is, what is the company's plan for remote work? This question is a good indication of understanding what is their roadmap in their organization with regards to the location of the job that's being done, or more importantly, just workplace flexibility in general. Because that's one of the most important factors for many people when it comes to the employee experience. Another question is, what is the training and onboarding process like? I love this question because whether you are going to be left to figure out a job on your own or you're going to have a support system in place, that's an important factor for many people. You want to feel appreciated in a role, and when you're left to just figure out how to teach yourself what you need to do, it's not really enjoyable. And it starts the employee experience off from a bad starting point. You also want to ask, how does this role connect to the higher level company objectives? It's important for people to feel like they are making a difference, that the work that they do is appreciated and it matters. And this role helps to do that. Another question that I think is important is to understand is, how will this role be measured? And how will I know if I'm successful? Asking these questions is an opportunity for you to understand, are you going to have a good day or not? And how will you know if you're going to have a good day? Or is the way that you're measured actually attainable? Is it achievable? Now, the last question I think that's important that you might be able to ask is, what do new hires do in their first few months to help them be successful? With this question, again, you are diving deeper into the new hire experience with the added benefit of knowing what it takes to make a positive impact on the organization. And it's an opportunity for you to maybe sell yourself in certain experiences that maybe you haven't had an opportunity to share because those questions were not asked. Think of these questions as an opportunity to sell your story one last time if those questions had not been asked earlier, or to reinforce the key theme or message that you're wanting to get across of why they should choose you. Now, when a virtual interview comes to an end, there's one final component that's critical for your success, and that is following up. Because when you follow up after the interview, it's an opportunity for you to stand out. Now, I think it's important that if you can send a simple thank you email to acknowledge the time that someone has spent with you as a recruiter or a hiring manager, that's going to make a world of difference. It helps demonstrate your professionalism and your customer service skills. Now, you might be saying, well, customer service skills are not a core requirement for this role that I'm applying to, and I would beg to differ. Because every role, whether we know it or not, there are internal customers. And you might be supporting externally, but internally and externally, customers exist, and you need to make sure that you are showing that you can demonstrate the right level of professionalism, empathy, just to make sure that you are showing that you actually care and that you can work well with other people. And sending a follow-up email can help convey that. Now, how soon you follow up is up to you. I've seen some people where they wait a couple of days. Others send it the same day. I've seen some people send it a couple hours later, or even immediately following the interview. It is up to you. I think the best way to do it is really to have it done within a day, or even just have it within a couple of hours afterwards. And you can have this email prepped in advance as well and customize it depending on what's said during the interview. But thank someone for their time, because there's a lot of candidates out there who are looking for jobs, and they took the time to interview you. Thank them for that and appreciate that. When I was building and leading teams throughout my career, whenever someone followed up, that was an extra plus in the column of maybe why I might want to consider them. It made a difference. It made them stand out compared to other candidates. And I'll tell you, there's some people who got promoted or hired because they took this extra step, and it made a world of difference. Well, that's it. That was a quick 30 minutes. I hope that this webinar has provided some value to you. And so I wish you well, and I wish you good luck in your next virtual interview. And remember, with the right preparation, you can set yourself up for success. Now, if you want to continue the conversation and have some additional support, feel free to connect with me. I've listed my websites here where you can schedule a free virtual call with me to see if we're a good fit to work together. And as I noted earlier, I do have an ebook available that is focused on interviewing. It's your definitive guide to getting hired. Now, it's available on chrishanna.ca and on Amazon. In the book, I dive into specifics on interviewing and setting yourself up for success. Through my website, chrishanna.ca, I also offer virtual mock interview sessions. And these are designed to help set you up for success. Because if you want to nail your interview and you want to get your dream job, don't let the interview get in your way. Preparing is important. And so I've got multiple options and packages available for virtual interview prep. I'd also love to hear from you. I'd love to know what's went well and what hasn't went well with regards to interviews that you've had in the past, or current successes that you're seeing as well with some of the interviews, maybe based on what we've talked about here, or maybe there's other additions that you think make sense to include as part of a future series of webinars around this. Lastly, feel free to subscribe and share to my podcast, The Chris Hanna Show. It's available on all major podcast directories as well. Every Monday, a new episode is released where I'm sharing tips and tricks to help you achieve more. Again, thank you for attending today's webinar. I sincerely appreciate it, and I wish you well. I look forward to connecting again soon with you for another webinar. Have a great day.